Imagine being 15 years old and waking up one morning to find that the world's most secure networks are now your playground. A teenage boy, his bedroom in suburban Florida, a dial-up modem humming in the background, a single monitor casting a ghostly glow across his face, and no one suspects that this kid is about to shake the foundations of NASA's and the U.S. Department of Defense's cyberwalls. This is no fiction. This is the remarkable and tragic true story of Jonathan Joseph James, known online as C0MRAID, the teenage hacker who breached NASA. At 15 years old, he broke into government systems, intercepted thousands of military emails, and quietly walked away. Until the pressure mounted, the investigation closed in, and the consequences caught up with him. How did a teenager, hidden behind wires and modems, infiltrate networks that world powers spent millions guarding? What did he discover when the government realized their defenses had failed? And how did a bright young mind find itself trapped between genius and prosecution, ending in a way no one expected? Tonight, we begin at midnight, the cursor blinking in his dimly lit room, the quiet click of keys, the crackle of a modem. Hop in with us as we enter that moment when everything changed, and nothing would ever be the same. Today on the Cybercrime chapter, we're shining a spotlight on the extraordinary case of Jonathan Joseph James, a teenager who managed to crack into some of the most secure government systems in the world, including NASA and the Department of Defense. At just 15 years old, he wasn't running after money or fame. Instead, he was pushing boundaries, testing limits, and unwittingly triggering a national cybersecurity alarm. We'll trace his path from his early fascination with computers to the moment his access forced NASA to shut down critical systems for weeks. We'll explore how he exploited vulnerabilities, what he discovered in those government networks, and how his actions compelled federal agencies to rethink how they defend their digital front lines. Then we'll uncover the twist, what came next for Jonathan, how the system responded, and where things went terribly wrong. And here's the promise. Stay with us until the end, because I'll share 3 concrete cybersecurity lessons drawn from this case. Principles you can apply today to protect yourself from modern-day hackers who may not be teenagers, but use the same tricks. So buckle up, because this story starts quiet. Just a modem dialing up, a bedroom lit by one monitor. But everything about it changes fast. Let's begin. At the very beginning, Jonathan was born on December 12, 1983, in Pinecrest, Florida, a suburb of Miami. He grew up in a middle-class household. His father was a computer programmer and his mother a homemaker. From a very young age, computers fascinated him. At about age 6, he was already drawn to his father's machine, experimenting with games and software. By the time he was around 13, Jonathan wasn't just playing games anymore. He was experimenting. He taught himself the C programming language, switched his father's computer from Windows to Linux just to see how it worked, and tinkered with network systems. His parents noticed the pattern: long hours at the computer, deep concentration, a quiet intensity that didn't match the average teenage hobby. Yet, academically, Jonathan did fairly well. His grades were good. It seemed at first like he was simply a computer nerd kid, with high marks and a hobby. But beneath that calm exterior lay something else: a restless intellect, a curiosity about how systems worked, and how they could be bent. His play moved from games into networks, from curiosity into exploration. Around that time, he adopted the alias C0MRAID, sometimes stylized C0MRAID, a screen handle he used on hacker forums and in online chats. Under that name, he began conversing with others online, sharing insights, learning, and quietly pushing boundaries. The internet had become his playground. The world of dial-up connections, chat rooms, early hacker forums. Those were the setting for Jonathan's explorations. Visualize a teenager in a dim room, the hum of a 56K modem, the glow of a CRT monitor, chat windows open, code windows flickering. Long nights where the boundary between schoolwork and hacking blurred. Though his family and teachers saw him as gifted, they also saw someone occasionally bored. Routine schoolwork didn't stimulate him the way a network challenge did. Despite his talent, he was still a teenager. Social circles limited, interests narrow, often isolated. The online world offered him interaction, recognition, and challenge. The alias C0MRAID became a digital identity, one separate from the boy in the classroom. In those chats and logs, he sharpened his skills, read books, studied Unix and C, and traded techniques with others. As a later interview would quote him, "I know Unix and C like the back of my hand, because I studied all these books and I was on the computer for so long." But then the moment came where exploration crossed into intrusion. In 1999, still only 15 years old, Jonathan began probing networks far beyond his school or home. The first major target, the server of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, a division of the United States Department of Defense. He installed a backdoor, intercepted thousands of messages, grabbed usernames and passwords, and then moved on to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration systems, including the International Space Station's environmental control software. At that moment, the quiet kid from Florida became someone the federal government could not ignore. The year is 1999. A young teenager named Jonathan Joseph James, just 15 years old, begins to probe beyond his bedroom screen. The alias C0mraid flickers in chat rooms and on hacker forums. What starts as exploration soon becomes something far riskier. First, he targets the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, an agency under the United States Department of Defense responsible for reducing threats from nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. Through weaknesses in security on a DTRA server located in Dulles, Virginia, James installs a backdoor, a secret entry point into the network. Using that, he deploys a packet sniffer, quietly capturing the flow of data. Over 3,300 messages are intercepted, along with dozens of usernames and passwords, including at least 10 tied to military machines. With credentials in hand, James escalates his access. He enters the system of the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, part of NASA. There, he doesn't just browse publicly accessible files. He downloads proprietary software that controlled the environmental systems aboard the International Space Station. ISS the code that managed temperature, humidity, and air circulation in the living quarters of astronauts. NASA estimates this software's value at $1.7 million. The consequences were immediate and serious. NASA was forced to take its systems offline. 21 days of shutdown to assess and repair the damage. Contractor labor alone cost roughly $41,000. Meanwhile, federal authorities responded with urgency. This was no harmless teenage prank anymore. It was a breach of national security infrastructure. Jonathan did not just stumble into a system. He read the signs. He looked for soft targets. As he later admitted in an interview, the government didn't take too many measures for security on most of their computers. They lack some serious computer security. He tested whether he could get in, and he succeeded. The DTRA backdoor, the NASA download, they were the kind of actions that until that moment had been reserved for spies or government operatives. Instead, it was a teenager doing it from Florida. And yet, even with all this power, he claimed he did it not for profit, but for the challenge. In a later interview, "What was fun for me was a challenge to see what I could pull off. I was just looking around, playing around. But whether playful or not, the impact was real. The systems compromised were operational, sensitive, and deeply trusted. The reaction from the U.S. government was swift. On September 21, 2000, Jonathan pleaded guilty to juvenile delinquency charges in the federal case. What actually happened when Jonathan James left the safe curiosity of tinkering and crossed into systems he had no business touching? To understand that, we need to look at how he worked, the exact tools, the gaps he exploited, and the state of the internet at the end of the 1990s. This was a time when many organizations still ran services with minimal hardening, when default configurations and unpatched services were common, and when a determined teenager could find a way in by combining simple technical skill with patience and a willingness to experiment. Jonathan's tool chest was not high-tech in the Hollywood sense. He relied on basic but effective utilities. Packet sniffers to capture network traffic, simple password guessing and cracking tools, and scripts that automated routine probes. He used social engineering where it helped. Learning usernames, trying common passwords, and following clues left in misconfigured systems. In plain language, he listened to the conversations happening on the wire and then used those conversations to get further access. Security researchers who reviewed the case later pointed out that he exploited lax server hardening and legacy protocols that were either weak by design or left enabled without password protection. Telnet and other unencrypted management services were still widely in use, and in many instances logging and monitoring were primitive or absent, which allowed him to remain unseen for longer than would be possible on a modern network. One of the most important technical moves in his attack was the installation of a sniffer on a Defense Threat Reduction Agency server. A sniffer is a program that captures packets, the basic units of data moving across a network, and can reveal credentials and the content of internal traffic if that traffic is not encrypted. By capturing thousands of packets, he was able to collect thousands of messages, usernames, and passwords, which in turn gave him the keys to escalate privileges and move laterally inside the network. The Justice Department later summarized that he intercepted over 3,300 electronic communications and obtained passwords that let him masquerade as legitimate users. Those captured credentials were effectively a skeleton key for the systems he targeted. With credentials captured and a backdoor established, Jonathan turned his attention to NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. He did not simply view public pages. He moved to download proprietary code, software that contractors use to manage environmental control systems on the International Space Station. That software, the records show, was treated as sensitive and required careful verification and control. Once NASA detected the intrusion, the agency pulled critical systems offline to contain the breach, an outage that lasted weeks while engineers audited systems, recovered data, and ensured no lingering access remained. The operational impact was concrete: extended downtime, contractor costs, and a crisis of confidence inside agencies that had assumed their internal networks were insulated from this kind of access. When we ask why he did it, the answer complicates how we label him. Jonathan repeatedly framed his activity as curiosity-driven, a desire to test boundaries, to prove what he could accomplish, and to learn. In his own words in later interviews and in archived discussions, he described the challenge as the reward. Not money, not notoriety. Friends, family, and some commentators echoed that assessment. This was a highly capable young person exploring systems that were, from his perspective, poorly defended. Experts who examined the case after the fact often described him not as a classic criminal motivated by gain, but as someone who pushed technical limits and exposed real vulnerabilities. That characterization does not absolve him. It does help explain the pattern of behavior. At the same time, the legal and moral boundary between exploration and crime is razor thin, and in Jonathan's case, it snapped. Technical curiosity has consequences when you access systems you do not own or have no permission to touch. Stealing credentials and downloading proprietary code are prosecutable acts under federal statutes. The government's response was decisive. The case was handled in federal juvenile court, and the Justice Department pursued charges that led to detention and restrictions on his future computer access. The institutional reaction reflected more than a legal posture. It reflected alarm at the possibility that a single, relatively unsophisticated actor could compromise networks fundamental to national security and human safety. Psychologically, the picture is layered. On the one hand, there is a profile we see often in technology: intense focus, advanced self-directed learning, comfort in abstract systems, and a preference for online relationships and recognition. On the other hand, there were intangible pressures: the weight of scrutiny, the stigma of being labeled a criminal, the social isolation that can follow public exposure. After his early conviction, he faced restrictions and attention that complicated any attempt to transition to legitimate cybersecurity work. Some colleagues and journalists later argued that the punitive response reduced opportunities for rehabilitation and reintegration into a field that could have benefited from his talent. Those arguments would become central to debates about how the justice system should handle young technologists who break the law out of curiosity rather than profit. Technically, his methods map to recurring lessons in cybersecurity. Do not rely on default configurations, encrypt sensitive traffic, monitor internal networks for anomalous sniffing or unexplained logins, and restrict administrative services. Psychologically, his story stresses the need for pathways that channel curiosity into ethical, legal outlets. Mentorship programs, bug bounty participation, and sanctioned training that allow talented young people to test themselves without criminal consequences. When security is lax and oversight is light, an individual's capability, even at 15, can produce systemic risk. When justice is strictly punitive without avenues for redemption, talented individuals may be pushed further from constructive options. But as his digital fingerprints spread across federal servers and his actions moved from private challenge to public incident, the investigators began to map the path he had taken. Small errors, reused handles, and the patterns of network traffic created a trail. And as that trail grew, the authorities tightened the net. The moment the authorities realized the intrusion was no isolated curiosity, no teenage prank, was when the chase began in earnest. For the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, it was clear. Someone had gained unauthorized access to highly sensitive government networks. What started with a sniffer, a backdoor, and a modest extraction of internal communications had grown into an incident drawing the full attention of federal law enforcement. A special task force was assembled. Although not strictly called Operation Solar Sunrise in all documents, the name is associated with early coordinated attacks against DoD systems. Logs and intrusion data began to point to one common thread. The origin of the access appeared to be within the United States, narrowing further to Florida and the Miami area internet nodes. Investigators traced IP logs, monitored chat rooms and hacker forums where the alias C0 raid appeared, and followed digital breadcrumbs from the compromised DTRA systems to servers routing through Miami. The FBI and collaborating agencies began digging into online chatter, postings under the handle C0 raid, IRC chats, early hacker forums, and bulletin boards where peers discussed network vulnerabilities. These investigations uncovered patterns. The same pseudonym used across multiple systems, similar scripting styles, and references to university and defense network nodes. With some correlation to audit logs from DTRA and NASA systems, the pieces of the puzzle were aligning. Investigators noted that many of the accessed usernames and passwords had last been used in systems whose traffic had been logged around times when C0 raid was active online. On January 26, 2000, federal and local agencies executed a coordinated raid on the home of Jonathan Joseph James in Pinecrest, Florida. Agents seized multiple desktop computers, hard drives, floppy disks, yes, floppy, modems, and stacks of printed notes and logs that appeared to track network activity. Neighbors reported seeing unmarked vehicles, agents in suits, and flashing lights as the house became a scene of federal action. The parents, understandably, were stunned. Their son, a bright but quiet teenager, now under investigation for intrusions into some of the nation's most critical systems. At just 15 years old at the time of the intrusion, and about 16 at the time of charging, Jonathan was prosecuted under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, CFAA. He became the first juvenile in the U.S. to be federally sentenced for cybercrime. On September 21, 2000, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of juvenile delinquency. Agreements were made given his age, in exchange for a sentence that included 7 months house arrest combined with probation until he turned 18, and a ban on recreational computer use. Behind the formal sentencing stood enormous pressure. To federal officials, the incident represented a wake-up call. If a teenager with modest resources could infiltrate DTRA and NASA systems, what did that say about the state of national cyber defenses? The fact that NASA had gone offline for 21 days, incurred significant recovery costs, and that proprietary software had been extracted, all contributed to a narrative of vulnerability and risk. The investigation shifted from just solving a crime to reassessing how government agencies secure their networks, audit their access logs, and respond to intrusions. For Jonathan himself, the raid and subsequent legal process changed everything. A teenager who had once explored systems for challenge now found himself in a legal limbo. Restricted access to computers, oversight, and the stigma of a federal conviction. His parents and family were thrust into media attention, privacy breach, and societal judgment. School, friends, and future prospects were all impacted. The transformation, from bedroom curiosity to federal defendant, was swift and irrevocable. After his initial sentencing, the trajectory of Jonathan Joseph James's life shifted from youthful exploration to something darker and more complex. What once began as a bedroom challenge transformed into a narrative of suspicion, loss of control, and ultimately tragedy. Following the plea deal in 2000, Jonathan was placed under house arrest, followed by probation until he reached adulthood. His sentence included restrictions on computer access, mandatory letters of apology, and oversight of his activities. In the years that followed, while many of his peers moved on with college or careers, Jonathan lived under the shadow of his notoriety and the legal conditions bound to his name. Though the formal punishment seemed light compared to what an adult offender might have faced, the personal cost was heavy. He had to rebuild his identity in a world that already knew him as the NASA hacker. His freedom was partial, his path forward uncertain. As time passed, Jonathan found himself under increasing scrutiny. The hacking world evolved. What used to be curiosity turned into large-scale, profit-driven crime. The media, the authorities, and online forums repeatedly referenced his past. According to those close to him, Jonathan became socially isolated, deeply introspective, and anxious about his future. He once told an interviewer that his curiosity wasn't about causing harm, but public perception had moved far beyond that. The label of cybercriminal haunted him. With each news story about hacking, breach, identity theft, he saw echoes of his past and wondered whether he would be dragged back into the spotlight. The turning point came in early 2007 during a major retail breach investigation. The TJX company's intrusion, alongside other chains like OfficeMax, that compromised tens of millions of customer records. Though Jonathan was not charged in that case, his name and alias C0mraid emerged in investigative documents as an unindicted co-conspirator, identified only by the initials JJ in some complaints. His father believed this referred to his son. Federal agents from the United States Secret Service executed search warrants on Jonathan's residence, his brother's home, and his girlfriend's home. In those raids they found a lawfully owned firearm and 2 suicide notes, one older, one more recent, that suggested Jonathan had been wrestling with his situation for some time. The raid, and the implication that Jonathan was the unnamed JJ, despite the absence of formal charges, had a profound psychological impact. His past, once almost a badge of honor, became a millstone. He wrote later that he felt targeted, as though his past made him the convenient scapegoat for a case he believed he had nothing to do with. On May 18, 2008, Jonathan James died by suicide, a self-inflicted gunshot wound in his Florida home. In his 5-page suicide note, he declared, "I have no faith in the justice system. Perhaps my actions today, and this letter, will send a stronger message to the public. Either way, I have lost control over this situation." He continued, "I honestly had nothing to do with TJX. Unfortunately, I don't picture the feds caring all too much." Jonathan was 24 years old at the time of his death. His father later revealed that Jonathan had long suffered from depression. The charge of association with the retail breach, the years under restriction, and the sense of being trapped by his reputation all contributed to his despair. This segment of Jonathan's story is the twist, not because the outcome was unexpected. Many tragedies follow brilliant youths, but because it reveals how a young person's earlier actions, legal response, societal perception, and mental health combined in a way that few anticipate when we talk about hacker legends. A boy who broke into NASA for curiosity later found himself under investigation again. Uncharged, yet entangled. What he once considered playful exploration turned into institutional suspicion, limited opportunity, loss of control. For the viewers, this part of the story forces reflection. Brilliance does not preclude vulnerability. Success in hacking does not insulate from consequences. What feels like freedom at 15 can become a chain at 24. Jonathan James, once known online as C0mraid, the teenage prodigy who outsmarted NASA, was now a young man in his mid-20s, living in the shadow of a reputation he could never escape. After serving his sentence, he had hoped for a normal life. He was under house arrest for 6 months, followed by probation. The world expected him to return as a cautionary tale, but Jonathan was more than that. He was intelligent, restless, and still deeply fascinated by technology. But that same fascination now came with fear. Every login, every connection, every keystroke felt like surveillance. Even years later, his name, Jonathan James, the boy who hacked NASA, followed him everywhere. He couldn't find stable work. Employers Googled his name, saw headlines like, "Teen hacker breaches NASA. Youngest cybercriminal in US history." And behind every headline was a system that didn't know how to handle him. A 15-year-old kid whose crime had been driven by curiosity, not greed. Jonathan once wrote in a private email, "They call me a criminal, but I just wanted to see how things worked. Yet, no matter how much time passed, he remained under a digital microscope. Then came 2007. The Secret Service launched a large-scale investigation into a massive retail data breach. Millions of credit cards stolen from major companies like TJX. Agents believed the attack had ties to past hackers. And somehow, Jonathan's name surfaced again. In a quiet Florida suburb, one morning, the sound of helicopters and pounding boots echoed through his neighborhood. The Secret Service raided his home again. They seized his computers, phones, and hard drives. He wasn't charged. He wasn't proven guilty. But in the eyes of the system, he was already the suspect. Jonathan told friends afterward that he felt hunted. He believed no matter what he did, he would always be blamed for crimes he didn't commit. In the weeks following the raid, Jonathan became withdrawn. He stopped communicating, spending most of his days indoors, disconnected from the world that once fascinated him. Those close to him said he seemed lost, a mix of anger, fear, and resignation. And then, in May 2008, the unthinkable happened. Jonathan James took his own life. He was just 24 years old. Authorities found a note near his body. His handwriting was clear, firm but tired. "I have no faith in the justice system. Maybe my death will send a stronger message to the public. Either way, I have lost control of this situation, and this is my only way out." His message echoed across the internet. Forums, IRC channels, hacker boards, the places where Jonathan once found belonging. People who had admired him, learned from him, or even competed with him were stunned. They couldn't believe that the same teenager who once outsmarted NASA had lost faith in the world he helped shape. After his death, a wave of reflection hit the hacker community and law enforcement alike. Some called him a criminal who went too far. Others called him a martyr of curiosity, a young mind punished too harshly for exploring digital boundaries. Cybersecurity experts still reference his case in ethics discussions. Warning: when we criminalize curiosity, we lose potential innovators. Jonathan's story continues to inspire and warn. He showed how one person, with nothing but a computer and curiosity, could shake governments, but also how a system unprepared for digital youth could destroy them. Jonathan James' death didn't just end a life. It started a conversation, one that's still shaping cybersecurity today. In the years following his passing, the federal government quietly began reassessing how it approached juvenile cyber offenders. Before his case, there were no clear distinctions between a curious teen experimenting with systems and a malicious actor out to profit or harm. Jonathan's prosecution exposed that gap. Federal agencies, including the Department of Justice and the Secret Service, began to rewrite parts of their juvenile cybercrime protocols, not to excuse hacking, but to understand intent. They started asking new questions. Was the hacker trying to learn or trying to damage? Was it curiosity or criminal intent? Those questions, simple as they sound, reshaped how digital law was enforced. After the Solar Sunrise case, cybersecurity became a matter of national security. But Jonathan's story showed the danger of treating every hacker like a terrorist. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, universities across the U.S. began incorporating hacker ethics courses into their computer science and cybersecurity programs. Professors cited Jonathan James by name. They discussed the moral dilemma he represented, a teenager whose curiosity clashed with law. One ethics professor at MIT said in a 2012 interview, "Jonathan's story is the reason we teach our students that with great access comes great responsibility. The system failed him, not because it caught him, but because it couldn't guide him." These courses began focusing on responsible disclosure, ethical penetration testing, and white hat hacking. All concepts that were still rare when Jonathan was alive. What used to be seen as criminal exploration is now a legitimate profession. Cyber defense. Today, companies around the world, from Google to NASA itself, run bug bounty programs that reward hackers for finding vulnerabilities. The irony isn't lost on those who remember Jonathan's story. The very thing that destroyed his life, curiosity-driven exploration, is now an industry standard. Jonathan's case also reignited a philosophical question that still lingers in tech communities. Should curiosity ever be a crime? Cybersecurity experts now discuss intent, context, and harm before assigning blame. Because if we punish the act of exploration itself, we risk discouraging innovation altogether. When Jonathan hacked NASA, he didn't steal money or destroy data. He didn't sell secrets or exploit victims. He looked, learned, and left. Yet, in the eyes of the law, that was enough. That's the paradox of the digital age. The same skills that can protect the world can also endanger it. And sometimes it depends only on who's holding the keyboard. Since the early 2000s, governments and private institutions have invested billions into cybersecurity. Cyber defense teams now run simulations that mimic what hackers like Jonathan once did for curiosity. Artificial intelligence monitors for breaches. Firewalls and encryption systems evolve daily. But beneath the code and security policies, one truth remains: the human factor matters most. Cybercrime isn't just about technology. It's about psychology, motivation, ethics, and understanding what drives people to explore forbidden systems. Jonathan's case proved that we can't separate hacking from humanity. For many in today's hacker community, Jonathan James is both a warning and a mirror. A reminder of how powerful, fragile, and misunderstood digital curiosity can be. Some hackers see his story and vow to stay white hat, using their skills to protect, not exploit. Others see the injustice and advocate for reform. Fairer laws, more humane responses, and mentorship programs for young coders before they cross the line. Organizations like Hackers for Good, DEF CON youth programs, and Cyber Patriot, founded by the U.S. Air Force Association, now exist specifically to channel that curiosity safely. They teach kids that hacking isn't evil. It's about understanding systems, protecting them, and innovating responsibly. Jonathan's story isn't just about one boy or one hack. It's about a moment in time when the internet was new, laws were outdated, and the world didn't yet understand how dangerous and how human curiosity could be. He forced the system to evolve. He became a symbol, not of guilt, but of growth. And even now, more than 2 decades later, his name appears in classrooms, documentaries, and conversations between cyber professionals who pause before judging the next teen hacker headline. Jonathan James' story is more than a cautionary tale. It's a mirror of our digital age. It asks us who we punish, who we teach, and who we lose when we fail to understand. Because every hacker starts with curiosity, and what we do next determines whether that spark builds the future or burns it down. Jonathan James reminds us that one person, one keyboard, can reach across the world and change everything. His story isn't just about a hacker and a government. It's about how connected we all are. Every click, every password, every line of code is part of something bigger. And the same vulnerabilities that NASA faced then still exist today, in our homes, our phones, and our daily lives. So let's take the lessons Jonathan's story left behind, and use them to protect ourselves in a world that's still learning how to be safe. Outdated software is a hacker's goldmine. When Jonathan broke into the Department of Defense, he didn't use magic. He exploited old protocols, systems that hadn't been patched, servers running software no one bothered to update. It's the same today. That pop-up you ignore, that remind me later button, could be the tiny crack that lets someone in. Every update you skip is an open door to your data. So close the door. Update regularly. When Jonathan infiltrated federal networks, he didn't have to break through unbreakable walls, just weak passwords. Even in the 90s, people were using simple, guessable logins. Today, billions still do. Here's the truth. Most hacks don't happen because of genius. They happen because of carelessness. So build better digital habits. Use unique passwords for every account. Mix numbers, letters, and symbols. And if you can't remember them, don't worry. Use a trusted password manager. Because when you reuse passwords, one breach can unlock your whole life. Jonathan's curiosity was his gift, and his curse. He didn't hack for money, or fame, or power. He did it because he wanted to understand. That's something we can all relate to, the desire to know how things work, to see what's behind the screen. But curiosity without guidance can lead to disaster. Today, you don't have to break the law to explore. You can learn cybersecurity legally, through ethical hacking courses, CTF competitions, or community programs that teach you how to defend, not destroy. If you love the thrill of discovery, channel it where it counts, into protection, innovation, and responsibility. The same mind that could break a system could also be the one that saves it. And one last truth before we close. In today's world, every one of us is connected to a network far bigger than ourselves. Hackers no longer need to breach NASA to find valuable data. Sometimes, all they need is a single unprotected phone or an email click. Be alert for phishing links. Verify URLs before you log in. Don't trust every download, and never underestimate how much your digital footprint reveals. Your data is your identity. Protect it. Jonathan James showed the world what one person could do with a computer and a dream. Today, we know better. That same power can build safer systems, stronger defenses, and smarter generations. The best way to honor his story is to learn from it. Jonathan James' story is both genius and tragedy. The story of a teenage mind that reached higher than anyone thought possible, and paid the ultimate price. At 15, he outsmarted some of the world's most advanced networks. At 24, he became a symbol of brilliance, of curiosity, and of a system that didn't know how to understand him. Even now, decades later, his digital fingerprints still echo through the halls of NASA and the Department of Defense, a reminder that behind every line of code is a human story. A story of ambition, risk, and consequence. But Jonathan's story isn't where the rabbit hole ends. Because there was another hacker, one who claimed he uncovered something NASA never wanted the world to see. A man who said he found evidence of UFOs, hidden deep within government files. His name was Gary McKinnon, the hacker who took on NASA and the Pentagon in search of the truth. Should I cover that next? If Jonathan's story moved you, leave a comment below and tell me what you think. Was he a criminal or a misunderstood genius? Hit that like button if you learned something new today, and don't forget to subscribe to the Cybercrime chapter, where we uncover the true stories behind the world's most mysterious cybercrimes.